Hi there guys, my name is Bizzleberry and I'm bringing you another support guide, this time for Lux Support. We're going to be focusing largely on the AP version of Lux Support because I feel like primarily that is the best. I will talk about a little bit about Enchanter Lux, but currently right now, just off the bat straight away, the AP build on Lux is stronger in my opinion than the actual Enchanter version. In these guides, if you haven't seen these guides before, we talk about the runes, the items, the build order, what your abilities do. Basically, it's a quick 101 30-minute video about everything to do with Lux. So hopefully, if you're looking to play Lux in mid, you could use this guide for mid as well in terms of the AP Lux portion as well. But we will be primarily talking about the support role. So as you can see here, these are the runes that I use most frequently when playing Lux, but there's some secondary changes here that we can make depending on either your playstyle or in the current situation of what you're playing against in the bot lane. So the complete standard here is to go into the Arcane Comet with the Mana Flow Band. Transcendence is pretty meta as well. You could also move into Absolute Focus if you want to have a slightly more damaging laning phase and the enemy don't have too much poke to get you below that 70% HP threshold. And Scorch, because Scorch works well with the Comet. So say if you hit an enemy and your Scorch is just if you hit an enemy and your Arcane Comet is about to come off cooldown, if you apply Scorch, it will trigger the Arcane Comet, so it can be a slight extra DPS boost there further as well. Inspiration, I like running Cookies and Cosmic Insight. You can get free boots if you feel like you got an easy lane, but I would still recommend the Cosmic Insight. Lux generally has pretty low cooldowns anyway, so this scales it through even more, particularly on her ulti, and particularly even more if you get Cloud Drinks. So cooldown reduction is one of Lux's favorite stats. If you're playing against something like a hard engage, thinking like a Leona or a Blitzcrank or a Thresh, you can go into Resolve to take Bone Plating and Revitalize. Revitalize will make your shield stronger on your W, and the Bone Plating is a pretty nice spell to mitigate some damage. So if you're against a hard engage, you can go this route. Or if you're feeling something a little bit spicy that's not played too often, you can do a cheap shot build with Ultimate Hunter to get your ulti off cooldown, or you could even go Relentless Hunter to try and move around the map a little bit more. But I'd say for the most part, a lot of people probably wouldn't bother with the domination secondaries, and I would largely recommend this build for most of your games. Double Adaptive Force on down here as well. You could run attack speed on your primary just so that you can also hit easy to hit champions in the laning phase pretty early. It can be quite nice, but if you're not sure, Adaptive Force is fine. And just always factor in on what you're playing against bot lane. You may want some magic resistance as opposed to the armor, but 99% of the time you'll probably be playing against an AD carry bot lane, so you'll want the armor there. Now we're going to be going into the practice tool, and we're going to go through everything else that we need to talk about. While we do that, we'll talk about the summoner options that you have at your disposal. Let me lock in Lux here with a base skin, if I can find it. Oh, there we go. Right at the bat. And let's hover and exhaust. So Lux's summoners are kind of interesting because she is generally a sniper, and the fact that she's got a lot of range on her abilities. So doing something like Ignite can be pretty difficult to get going outside of the laning phase. Laning phase Ignite can work to help secure a kill. It's not completely useless in that regard. So if you're playing against a healer on the bot side, Ignite could be quite valuable. But generally, running any of the other summoners such as Heal, Exhaust, or Barrier can be quite nice. Say if your AD carry is running Exhaust, you could do Heal for yourself. The extra movement speed to get away from ganks for both you and your AD carry can be pretty important. So think more along the lines of a defensive summoner as opposed to an aggressive one like Ignite. And obviously you want the flash, as always. Now we'll talk about the AP Lux build here. So In the past, Enchanter Lux was on par, if not sometimes better, than AP Lux. So we'll go through both of the build orders. You can decide what you want to do in your games. As I mentioned at the start, I personally prefer AP. I think she has some really nice values and the items aren't too expensive. The main one being Ludens. Maybe the conversion cost there is probably the hardest one out of the build, but AP Lux is pretty nice to do. If you've got a lot of auto attacking champions on your team, say if you're playing with a hyper carry bot side such as like a Vayne, and you've got like a Kindred in the jungle and maybe some sort of like Bruiser top side as well, you could maybe consider going Ardent Censer because one of your abilities will shield everyone. But let's have a look. We'll talk about the AP first. So Spell Thieves, right off the bat. If you're against a hard engage, you could do Relic Shield, but you will be missing out on that mana regen that the Spell Thieves gives you. Let me give myself lots of money here. Right, so you will generally be trying to get this Lost Chapter in as quickly as possible. The 10% cooldown reduction and the extra mana is huge. Don't be afraid to pick up boots or speed along the way. But your main goal is to get this Lost Chapter in as quickly as possible. Now, here is where it gets pretty tricky on the gold situation because it's a bit of a jump from the Lost Chapter to the Ludens. You've got a blasting one on the way, but then it's still 1,000 gold again to get to that point. What you may want to do is go to your tier 2 boots in. The magic penetration gives you a lot of damage, and the movement speed can be pretty helpful. So it's okay to buy those boots a little bit earlier and then complete your Ludens. It depends on your gold situation on the bot side of the map as well. But you want to rush this Ludens in the AP build. Now here's where it gets funky because, as I mentioned, Ludens was probably the hardest, but you could go the Death Cap route and that makes it considerably harder. But only go the Death Cap route if you're extremely fed, because as a support, getting enough money to buy one of these rods, let alone two, and then having to do the conversion cost for another 1,100 gold is pretty difficult. But if you're really fed, then the Death Cap is your best option. Unless the enemy has a lot of magic resistance. Now, I mean, like a few people have Merc Treads plus another Null Mantle. That's when you're going to want to start looking at a Void Staff. It will actually provide you more damage than a Death Cap, and it's cheaper and the components are easier. So always be giving, by the time you completed this Ludens, have a look at the resistances on the enemy team. If it looks like they're going to have at least like 2 or 3 people that are going to be having a decent magic resistance, go the Void Staff route. For sure. At this point, you could then lean into buying a couple of rods into a Death Cap, but the game will probably end before you get to complete this item. Otherwise, you can go into a Zhonya's build to protect yourself against assassins. So Stopwatch can be pretty useful to help against the assassins, and then you will creep in, you pick up the Fiendish Codex, and then that will give you the 45% cooldown reduction. Because when you have the Ludens, you'll have Transcendence as well at level 10, which will be 35% cooldown reduction with the Cosmic Insight. And then you'll only be missing 10. So this Zhonya's route is a good option to be able to get onto the max cooldown reduction. It would probably be the only cooldown reduction item route that I would recommend in terms of finishing that off. So it can be pretty valuable in terms of just mainly because of the cooldown reduction, 45%. So that's the AP build. Hopefully I've explained enough about the Void Staff, when to take a Void Staff. Now, when you do Enchanter Lux, there are so many different options here. You're going to need to be familiar with the situation of what champions are in your game, how many people are going to be auto-attacking a lot. But I can show you a raw build that you could take for every game and generally still be on the right track. So this is considering that you're playing with an AD carry on the bot side, someone physical damage and ranged. Okay, so boots would probably be slightly different. You might want to be looking more towards something like the Boots of Lucidity to get into that 45% cooldown route a little bit quicker. If you're against a little CC, then you might be looking more towards the Merc Treads. But let's just say you're not too scared of their CC, their crowd control. you go the cooldown boots, and then you're going to be wanting to buy an Athene's Unholy Grail as your first core item. This, you'll be doing a lot of damage anyway, so you'll be building up the blood charges. And then you want to go Ardent Censer, because you have an AoE shield, and it will give everyone that gets hit by the shield the Ardent Censer buff. That's pretty useful on the objectives where everyone's grouping up around, whether it's a large team fight or Baron or Dragon. So this will then push you to the 45% cooldown pretty early on with this build. Any cooldown that you do pick up, if you do have Transcendence, will be then converted into AP, which is totally fine. In terms of route here, you can just take whatever your favorite item is after this. You probably will be able to make your way towards another item. So you could be looking towards something like a Shurilia's. Shurilia's can be pretty good, or you could go Twin Shadows. Both items are relatively cheap. As I mentioned before, both of them have 10% cooldown reduction, so they'll be converted into, as of Season 10, it will be 20 AP per 10% cooldown reduction. But those items will help you enable to land your Qs more consistently and help catch people out. You will still do some decent damage as Lux in this situation. It's not as good as AP Lux, obviously, but you'll become a little bit more utility. If you don't want to take the extra movement speed for catching people out, you could, just buy Redemption. Redemption is a valid option here too. Once again, you get another 20 AP from the cooldown reduction because it'd be over, and then Redemption's just pretty useful in fights anyway. And then you have an Ardent Censer, so that would then, if they get healed by the Redemption, they would also get the Ardent Censer buff as well. Right, I don't think there's anything else I necessarily want to cover there. If you are playing Enchanter Lux, you can always pick up a stopwatch if you're against a lot of assassins. You could go the Zhonya's route too, actually, as well, instead of picking up like the third redemption item. So that's everything you need to know in terms of items on Lux. Now let's go talk about her item, her build, her rune. We were going for her runes, her abilities. Sorry, we're going to talk about her abilities, and there isn't too much to her. She isn't an overcomplicated champion. That's why she's pretty popular with a lot of new players. But if you're not familiar with them, we'll go through them now. So her passive is whenever you land an ability on a champion, I can get a target dummy here. So whenever you land an ability on an enemy unit, I should say, any enemy unit, they will get this glow on them. If you auto hit it, they'll take bonus damage. Also, your ultimate, if they already have one of these debuffs on them, it will also proc the illumination debuff and apply a new one. That's a little bit more advanced, and we'll go into that a little bit more. But there's two ways to activate your the passive. Is an auto attack, which will be your main one, especially during the laning phase, or your ultimate. I need to get rid of these minions. They're getting too involved. There we go. It's a nice little extra damage boost. I would say don't focus too much on it as support. Only do it if you feel like you can absolutely do it safely. It's not worth taking the damaged backlash that you would take by doing it, but it is something that you should be, trying to lean towards trying doing. So the Q is a binding, very similar to Morgana, but it hits 2 targets, which makes it quite special. So Q in the line hits both targets, hits 2 targets. So in the laning phase, there's a little trick you can do. So when enemies aren't paying attention, if you aim for the caster minion, so pretend this is a caster minion, enemy champion standing behind it, you can use that as a way to get in and engage. Sometimes players forget about the fact that the binding's double. Just a nice little trick there that you can do. Lux's W is a AoE shield, so it goes out and then it comes back in again on a short delay. You will also always receive the double portion of the shield, and that affects allied champions. So as you can see, that would work quite nicely with the Ardent Censer if you're going the Enchanter route. E, Lux's probably core ability, I would say. That's what she's most known for. It does a slow. Once you enter this zone as an enemy, you will be slowed. And also if you get hit by the spell, you'll also be temporarily slowed. As of 10.12, the duration of the slow is 1 second. So one thing you can do is say if you land your E right in the middle of a target, you don't need to detonate your E straight away. Sometimes what some people do is they pop a shield when they get in the zone, but what you can try and do is see if you can make the shield come off naturally and then detonate the E. Another important thing here as well, you can use this as a kiting mechanic. So you just leave it running as long as possible. When they get to the absolute tip of the zone, then detonate it, then they're slowed for another second. So you don't always have to just launch this out and just detonate it straight away. That's a pretty important thing to take note of. If you also land your E, you can use that in combination to help land your Q as the enemies will be slowed. So that's a nice little effect that you can do there. Also, there's so many interactions with this E. So another interaction with the E is illumination stacking. So in that example I just showed you, a more advanced thing would be to get the slow debuff on the ground, do your E, auto attack, and as your auto attack's flying out again, you then detonate your E, and then as the projectile's landing, the illumination buff would refresh, and then it hits. So I'll try and show that again. It's a shame there's no slow-mo, but get the slow on the ground, Q, detonate, and then as the auto attacks in the air, then just detonate it. So it's a nice little spike in damage there. And now finally your ulti. Your ulti has a really, really long range. Massive laser. After a short delay it will hit them. Hits all units going through minions and champions. And Lux's ultimate, we're on currently 45% cooldown reduction with no cloud drakes. At level with 3 points in the ulti, it's only on a 22-second cooldown. So you can imagine if you stack some cloud drakes on top of that. Sometimes it has been occasions where I've had double, triple cloud drake, and it puts this ulti on such a low cooldown that it feels like I'm spamming it. But the main interaction here, you can use this to wave clear. Say you need to do a quick reset on the wave, you can use this to wave clear with your E, to detonate with your E, then ulti. As what the E will do, it will apply the illumination debuff, put the stacks on the enemy, and then what the ulti does, it detonates all debuffs of your passive and will renew that as well. So your ulti always detonates the stack and then reapplies instantly. So it's more advantageous to use this when you have already landed an ability on an enemy. The most common combo is a very quick, at max range would be a Q into an instant ult, as not only will you get the Q damage and the ult damage, but you also will get one passive off as well, which could be enough to finish someone off. Apart from that, like Lux's abilities aren't too complicated. Most things are revolved around her E. You can use your E, as mentioned, to set up for your Q. Her base damages in the laning phase are pretty good. So some matchups that Lux would probably struggle up against in the laning phase would be hard engage. She's pretty squishy. You would have to go the bone plating route early. There used to be a aftershock build that you could run on her, but at the moment that's not viable. That was a valid answer to hard engage. That would make you a lot tankier if you were to land your Q, but generally against something like a Blitzcrank and you get hooked, you're pretty much dead, as she is really squishy in the laning phase, well, throughout the entire game. She works best against mages, as her E and her Q range are extremely long, and as you can imagine, if you catch out an enemy mage like a Zyra or Brand with a Q max range and then using a laser, that will be about 60 to 70% of their HP gone instantly. And then they'll be scared until they next reset. And because Lux's ult cooldown isn't too long, even with 1 point, it's not that bad. You can just do that. So the enemy will always be paying attention to whether or not where your Q is going. So against enchanters, it's more of a skill matchup, because if the enchanter can harass you down and dodge your abilities, then it will be able to out sustain the DPS that you are sort of putting out. So bear that in mind. It just comes down to a pure skill matchup against most enchanters. Try and dodge any of their skill shots while landing yours. They'll be trying to do the same. Some AD carries you would like to work with are generally some more longer range champions to help follow up on your binding. Caitlyn being the main one. She can also put a trap if you land your snare down, and then it just ends up being a chain combo of crowd control and lots of attacks going down there. Varus would work as well. If he channels up his arrow on a binding target, it's instant easy damage. Those are some very easy examples. Misfortune as well, the combo of if you land a binding and then both of you ulting at the same time on that target, they will die. Ezreal works well as well. So basically lots of champions that have skill shots. If you land a binding, easy WQ for the Ezreal. Easy cheap damage there. So as you can imagine, a lot of those long range champions with skill shots work really nicely with her. The ones that you probably struggle with, it's not impossible to play with, but stuff like Lucian and some of the hyper carries you'll struggle to support in the lane. Even if you're playing Enchanter Lux, playing with something like with a Vayne, the Vayne's going to take a lot of free damage. Your shield, honestly, level 1 isn't particularly amazing. And with someone as fidgety as Vayne, they might miss one or both of the shields depending on their pathing, as it is a skill shot, the W. So you need to factor those in when going in. Like if you're playing Evolution and being hard engaged and aggressive, you would have to land everything, and you have to bear in mind the minion aggro. So it's not impossible. I've done it before, but it just makes the lane pretty difficult, as Evolution will want to make a play really early on. So the ideal is to play with skill shot champions, AD carry wise. You could maybe link up with an AP carry on the bot side that also has a skill shot that would affect the binding. Just bear in mind the enemy might go single or double magic resistance runes, and that would affect your DPS a lot. That would affect your damage a whole ton if they do decide to go even just one of those magic resist runes. So might not be the best idea just purely because of that. And yes, we got asked a question in chat. This W shield will apply everyone Ardent Censer that gets hit by that. Other than that, unless there's any other questions coming through on the Twitch chat, not sure if there's anything else to mention there. Guardian on 10.12 got nerfed, so I wouldn't recommend that on Lux. I don't think Guardian is a good spell at all, even against hard engage. I personally would just stick with the Arcane Comet, or you could maybe do an area build if you're an enchanter, maybe. But I think Arcane Comet just does really well because you've got two damaging abilities there that will almost guarantee landing the Arcane Comet just because of the slows or the binding, and they can't move out of it. Well, I hope this guide helps you out, especially if you're a new player to either League or to the Champion. I do have other support guides on my YouTube channel that you can feel free and have a look around. I'll link a Lux Grandmaster support gameplay underneath in the dilly-do in the comment section down below, so you can see how I personally play her and what my AP build looks like, and what it's like playing her in high ELO. Do consider subscribing. I'm going to be bringing out more tier lists for each patch as a support player and other champions. I'm looking at doing some Leona soon, and maybe a Yumi or a Janna, moving into trying to do a guide almost every single day for you guys on YouTube. So hope you guys are enjoying that series and all the other stuff that's been going on. Take care, and feel free to pop over at twitch.tv/Bizzleberry if you've got nothing better to do. Take care.